la 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 la. Hello and welcome to another episode of We Are What We Read. I hope that those of you who have been following along with our series saw last month's episode where we had guests all from the UK. That was a very exciting episode. Shawn and I both have lots of friends around the world, so we will certainly be doing more of those international episodes coming up. So keep your eye out for them. And with that in mind, I'm Kristopher Zgorski, your host, the founder and sole reviewer at the book review blog BOLO Books. And as always, the talented and one and only Shawn Reilly Simmons is joining me as co-host. How was your Thanksgiving, Shawn?
It was actually really nice. Thank you very much. I hope you had a good one too. And
I
thanks for
did.
again for having me on the show. Just honored to be here. I can't believe this is number 8. I can't believe I've been doing it for so long already, but it seems like we just started.
I know it really does. And this is actually the last 2023 episode. This one will be coming out. This is the December episode. So we've got 7 guests tonight for you to hear what they have to say about books that they love. Some great choices. So I can't wait for you to hear. So let's jump right in. And we're going to start with Anjili Babbar. Anjili is a writer, professor, and scholar of Irish and British literature with a particular focus on crime fiction and criminality. She has published on topics ranging from Irish crime fiction to representations of Irish folklore in popular culture. Her recent book, Finders, Justice, Faith, and Identity in Irish Crime Fiction, out from Syracuse University Press, is an extensive survey of Irish crime writers and the ways in which they subvert literary traditions and genre conventions. Take it away, Anjali.
Thanks, Chris and Shawn. Thanks for having me. I'm glad you guys had a good Thanksgiving. I was going to ask that, but I guess I don't need to. I'll jump right in and say that the book that I picked is The Remorseful Day by Colin Dexter, which was released on my birthday in 1999. I feel like one of the best birthday presents I ever got. It is, excuse me, the last book in the Inspector Morse series, and I think I probably don't have to worry about spoiler alerts because of the title. It's pretty obvious that it ends really tragically. This is the book in which Inspector Morse dies at the end. The title comes from a poem by A.E. Housman, which is about the passing of time and regret. The fact that we only realize how precious life and time are as we get closer to losing them. And so that sets the stage. The plot is obviously Morse is investigating a murder. And obviously it's a murder of a woman he's connected with. But because of this connection and the fact that he seems to be hiding something, he comes under a lot of unwarranted suspicion. But it turns out that in fact he is protecting his boss and friend, Strange, and his family. So the suspicion is actually unwarranted, but we don't find that out until the end. I think it's really interesting. I reread the book and watched the episode, the TV episode that's based on it again to get ready for this. And I had completely forgotten, but that subplot is completely missing from the TV series. And I think that's really a shame because it tells us a lot about Morse's process of development in the series. I think he's always been really stubborn and self-assured, but in this case he finally has to confront his uneasiness about the fact that law and ethics don't always align, and he chooses ethics, which is an extremely difficult task for him because he's undermining the law that he's devoted his life to and given up having any kind of social life for. He also starts to question his ideologies in other ways in this book. For example, he's a staunch atheist throughout the series, and in this book, he finds himself drawn into the Oxford Oratory, where he goes and lights candles to St. Anthony of Padua. A lot of this self-reflection is because of the fact that he's gravely ill and he suspects that he's dying, and he's, just like in the Housman poem, starting to regret the way that he's lived his life and to explore if there are other ways that would have been better for him. So the reason I picked the book, it's meaningful to me in a lot of ways. First of all, I think it's really interesting the way it addresses the differences that sometimes arise between law and ethics. I mean, this is not uncommon in crime fiction. You can think of a lot of examples, such as the end of Murder of the Orient Express, where Poirot decides that he's not going to solve the murder. But I think what's interesting about The Remorseful Day is that he actually talks about how torturous a decision this can be for somebody who's sort of constructed his identity around bringing the truth to light and serving legal consequences. And I think it's particularly poignant that by choosing ethics, Morse also chooses to make himself even more isolated than he already is as he faces pain and impending death. Along those same lines, it interrogates the standard of the loner detective who can't have a social life because he's so dedicated to justice. Colin Dexter does this throughout the series by pointing out that Morse's isolation is a result of class distinctions. He's too working class to be accepted at Oxford. He's too educated to be accepted on the police force. And now he wants to have faith and comfort as he's dying, but he realizes that he's dedicated himself so much to logic that he feels dissociated from religion. And because he's coming under suspicion for choosing his ethics, he realizes that the people most meaningful to him, like Sergeant Lewis, don't actually know him at all. And the last point I wanted to say is that book is especially meaningful to me because it is a spark that helped to ignite the path of Irish crime fiction, which is my field of study. Morse is comforted by lighting candles to St. Anthony, who is known for a bit of rebelliousness in the face of church hierarchy. And so he becomes a symbol in the book of an adherence to justice through conscience over rules. In the scene in which Morse talks to Anthony is literally intertextually replicated at the beginning of the first Jack Taylor book by Ken Bruin. In following that, Anthony becomes a way for Irish writers and writers subsequently influenced by them to reflect on what justice means to them and how it might be pursued both within and without of the traditional paths of religion and the law. So that's what I wanted to say. Please read it. It's a masterful book. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I have a signed copy, I have to tell you, of that book. And it was such a random thing because it was like one of those enter here to win a signed copy. And I never win anything. And I got it in the mail like weeks later. I'm like, I have it. So thank you for bringing that to us. And I'm like, now I'm going to go back and reread it just because you spoke about it so passionately. And so I feel like I learned something. And thank you for sharing that. And it's always good to see you. So our next guest, we are thrilled to have Brenda Buchanan. Brenda sets her crime novels in and around Portland, Maine. Her 3-book Joe Gale series features a contemporary newspaper reporter with old school style who covers the courts and crime beat at the fictional Portland Daily Chronicle. An attorney since 1990, Brenda is currently writing about a criminal defense lawyer whose passionate and creative defense of her clients leads her deep into the rough and tumble world of Maine crime. Her short story, Means, Motive, and Opportunity, published in the anthology Bloodroot, Best New England Crime Stories, 2021, made the other distinguished stories list in Best American Mystery and Suspense. Her story, Assumptions Can Get You Killed, well, that's obviously, appears in Wolfsbane, Best New England Crime Stories, 2023. LGBTQ folks always have leading roles in Brenda's books, just as they do in her life. And we are thrilled to welcome Brenda. Brenda, take it away.
Well, thank you. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you tonight. And I congratulate you both, Kristopher and Shawn, on this wonderful feature, which I've really been enjoying. And I also want to congratulate Kristopher on the Amelia Award, which I know is what inspired him to start this series. So that's just such wonderful news and so well deserved. The book that I want to talk about tonight is called Light on Bone. And it is written by Catherine Lasky, whose name may be most familiar to you as a young adult author. She's written more than 100 books, mostly in the young adult, genre. However, Light on Bone is an adult mystery, and I love this book because its protagonist is Georgia O'Keeffe, and it's set in New Mexico in real life. Georgia O'Keeffe in the 30s left New York and moved to Mexico temporarily after she had been treated for a nervous breakdown because her husband had forced her to have an abortion and was cheating on her flagrantly. and she had a nervous breakdown, and she went to gather her health, regather her health in New Mexico. And that happened in real life. And that is the jumping off point that Catherine Lasky takes in this book. And it is a brilliant and beautiful book, and I encourage people to read it. As an artist, obviously, Georgia O'Keeffe was a close observer of things, and that makes her perfect as an amateur sleuth. And I would never have thought of putting her in that role, but she really is terrific. The book starts out where she gets up very, very early before the light of the day, before dawn, and goes out walking, exploring out in the desert, looking for things to paint, wanting that early morning light, and she stumbles across a body. And that happens right off. I'm not spoiling anything for you. And the book is about the solving of that murder and how she joins up with the sheriff, who she becomes friendly with, to assist him in solving that murder. The characters are rich. The setting is sublime. Catherine really conjures what the light is like in New Mexico at the Ghost Ranch, which is where she was staying outside of Santa Fe, in a casita there, and what it was like for her both morning and evening to really immerse herself in the light. And that is when she gets insight into what's happening in this case. There are so many ways that this book follows our genre and then breaks the rules a little bit. And somebody who is as skilled a writer as Catherine Lasky can break every rule in the book, as far as I'm concerned. The other thing that's so interesting to me about this book and really struck me is it's written in the early 30s when fascism is on the rise in Europe. And she writes about Georgia O'Keeffe meeting, for example, Charles Lindbergh at the Ghost Ranch, who was a notorious anti-Semite. And it just the echo of today, where we see rising fascism. This really strikes all those chords, in talking about her concern about her country and the world, and Jewish people and anybody else who's other. So this is a beautiful book. It is well written. It is well imagined. It is beautifully executed. I first heard of it this year when she won the Maine Literary Award. She lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but has Maine connections and therefore is eligible to enter her work in the Maine Literary Awards competition. And it won first place for crime novel. And so I met her at Maine Crime Wave, and my wife read this book, bought it, read it, and raved about it all summer. And I, for some reason, didn't get to it until this fall. And when I did, I completely understood. And I was reading it in November, earlier this month, when I went to the Maine Crime Wave, and Catherine was there, and I tracked her down and just told her how much I love this book. So now I'm telling all of you how much I love this book, and I encourage you to read it. Again, it's called Light on Bone by Catherine Lasky, and it's a memorable and beautiful book. And I hope that you read it and enjoy it as much as I did. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Brenda. I'm so glad you brought that book. It's been on my list for a while now, and now I'm going to push it to the front of the thing. I'm a huge Georgia O'Keeffe fan, having toured both Ghost Ranch and Abiquiu, so I'm really excited to jump in and see what that's all about.
Well, I'm jealous that you've been there, because having read this book, it's now on my short list of places to go. So.
It's worth it. It's a beautiful trip.
I bet. Thank you
very much. Our next guest is Alafair Burke. Alafair Burke is the Edgar-nominated New York Times bestselling author of 14 novels of suspense, including The Ex, The Wife, The Better Sister, and Find Me, and co-author of the best-selling Under Suspicion series. A former prosecutor, she is now a professor of criminal law. She recently served as president of the Mystery Writers of America and was the first woman of color to be elected to that position. She lives in New York. Welcome, Alafair.
Thank you so much for having me, Kristopher and Shawn. And I also want to echo congratulations to you for the well-deserved recognition of your contributions to our crime fiction community, Kristopher. And thank you for using it as an opportunity to do this great series with Shawn. So thanks and congratulations to both of you. The book I wanted to talk about tonight, maybe not surprisingly, is Where Are the Children? by Mary Higgins Clark. For those of you who are not familiar with it, I'm going to make sure that you are now. It was published in 1975. The main character began her life as Nancy Harmon. 7 years before we meet her on page 1, she's gone through a very traumatic event. She was married in California with 2 young children, and everything was fine until those 2 children disappeared. And then their bodies were found 2 weeks later, washed up in the ocean, having been murdered. Despite flimsy evidence in the midst of her trauma and grieving for her children, she's arrested and put on trial for their murder, and is convicted. When she's convicted, as if things couldn't get worse, her husband commits suicide, and everybody blames her for the entire family's death. The conviction is set aside on a technicality, but everybody still thinks she did it. Her name is dirt, and she still doesn't have her family. When we meet her, things are better. She's living under a different name. She's changed her name. She's changed her hair color. She's met a wonderful man named Ray, who's one of the few people who knows her past. She has 2 other children now, Missy and Mike. She lives in a home she loves, in a community she loves, and she's still trying to make her way through life knowing what she lost in the past, but trying to focus on her future. Then her birthday comes. She turns her back for 1 minute, even though she watches those children because they're everything to her. She goes inside to put the laundry away. And when she comes outside, her children who had been playing on the swing are gone. And it all starts again. The only thing they have is one child's mitten, and all of her secrets come out. She's in the spotlight again, and she's presumed to have done the horrible things that she did to her first 2 children, to have done it all over again in Cape Cod. The reason why I find this book so impactful, I mean, Mary Higgins Clark went on to become known as the Queen of Suspense, continuing her work, for over the course of decades. I think because she was known for her entire body of work, and her brand was known as kind of the normal women who get stuck in terrible situations and have to help themselves out of it. She was clean, so to speak, right? There weren't a lot of profanity. There wasn't a lot of sex or violence on the page. Because she was known for that, I think there's a tendency to maybe undervalue her work and perhaps not take its themes as seriously as perhaps they were due, especially in the time that she developed them. So for those of you who haven't read the book, or if those of you who read it a long time ago, if you reread it now, or if you read it with fresh eyes now for the first time, it's remarkable. It's almost shocking how prescient she was about the kinds of stories that would continue to attract readers and to mystify readers 50 years later. So the plot of the book has an unreliable narrator, right? Something that everybody started to do after Gone Girl. There's a lot of psychological evidence in it. Although it's handled very deftly, there's definitely references to children being subjected to really horrific abuse. There's allusions to danger sometimes not being from the outside world in, but closer to home. All of the themes of modern psychological suspense, before we even used that term, were here in this book in 1975. And I think people kind of forget that people like me, my work wouldn't exist without her. Gone Girl, Megan Abbott, Allison, my best friend, Allison Galen, Megan Abbott, Laura Lippman, all those psychological suspense books. I think many of us kind of tip our hat towards Mary, because we wouldn't be able to do it if she hadn't done it first. And just on a personal note, she's kind of a heroine of mine for lots of reasons, but she was widowed at a very young age. I don't know if people knew that, and had a lot of kids, and had to have food on the table for them and make a living. And she went back to college as to show them. She went to night school at Fordham's to prove to them that you should have an education. And she would wake up early in the morning before she fed them breakfast to write books. And I just think, and then she handled her business like a businesswoman. I mean, she was a boss, and for 50 years of working in publishing, she stayed at one publisher, and There's so much I admire about her as both an author and as a person, and was always kind to readers. But mostly I want people to realize how iconic and groundbreaking that book was. So if you haven't read it, read it. Even if you haven't read it, I promise you it's worth a fresh read, because it's astonishing what she accomplished. Plus, it's an excuse for me to show you one of the best gifts I ever got. Megan Abbott gave me this beautiful edition of Where Are the Children, that I keep close to me. So thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about it.
Thanks for sharing that. And I'm going to read it again because that is one of the very first adult books I read. And I was very young when I read it. And
yeah,
I
you
think
probably missed a lot of the darker stuff. It's a book that can be read at a lot of different levels. You can just read it for the plot, but if you're paying close attention, it's layered in with some pretty dark stuff.
yeah, and I was extremely far away from being a parent at that time myself. So I think, I will have a new perspective on it now. But yeah, I cannot wait to dive back in. Thanks for bringing that back to, and one of the highlights of my life was meeting. I got to meet her once, Mary Higgins Clark, and it was just like a highlight. And one of the other highlights is you saying my name a bunch of times today. I'm so honored that you even know who I am.
Of course,
I'm such a fan of yours. I'm such a fan. I'm always like fangirl. I'm trying not to fangirl too much at these shows, but that
Keep
was
on.
lovely.
Thank you so
Yes.
much.
Thank you for being here. She was a wonderful wonderful person to the whole community, and so are you. So thank you again. Our next guest, I'm excited. Another person that I'm just so thrilled that is here, that I get to talk about and hear her. Maybe she'll say my name too. Vicki Delany is one of Canada's most prolific and varied crime writers, and a national bestseller in the U.S. She has written more than 50 books. Clever cozies to gothic thrillers to gritty police procedurals to historical fiction and novellas for adult literacy. She is currently writing the Tea by the Sea mysteries. Those just sound lovely. The Sherlock Holmes Bookshop series, the year-round Christmas mysteries, and the Lighthouse Library series as Eva Gates. Vicki is a past chair of Crime Writers of Canada and co-founder and organizer of the Women Killing It Crime Writing Festival. Vicki is the recipient of the 2019 Derek Murdoch Award for contributions to Canadian crime writing. She lives in Prince Edward County, Ontario. Welcome, Vicki.
Shawn Reilly Simmons, thank you very much for those kind words, and thank you to you and to Kristopher for inviting me. I cannot talk enough about this book that I'm going to discuss with you. Everybody I know has been told that this is a book that you really have to read. One of my 2-3 favorite books of all time, so I do get a little excited about it. And the book I want to talk about is An Instance of the Finger Post by Ian Pears. Ian Pears started writing, he wrote a series, a fairly ordinary series, if you don't mind my saying, so good, but nothing exceptional, about an art dealer who lives in somewhere in Italy, I believe. It's been a while since I'd read it. And his wife is Italian and she works in art too. So fairly traditional sort of series. But then he's written this book and a couple of others that I might mention if I have time, that are absolutely, as I said, extraordinary. The Instance of the Finger Post was first published in 1997. A finger post, first of all, if you don't know what it is, it's not a commonly used North American word, is a signpost. Think of a signpost that has directions going in all different, arrows in all different directions. That is actually what a finger post is. So the book is written in 1997. It is set in 1663 in England, in London. In London and I believe in Oxford, very shortly after the restoration of the monarchy, after the English Civil War. So there's a lot of turmoil going on in society, and there's certainly a lot of religious conflict. Now, first of all, I feel that Ian Pears' handling of the setting is really excellent. He really does have a feel for the times, for the people, and for the thought. At this point in time, we're having a real clash between those who really are still holding on to the ancient or medieval way of believing things and doing things, and then new thoughts, new ideas that will eventually lead into what we call modern science and modern medicine. One of the things that struck me a lot, just as a little aside, early in the book, this man has this bad eye infection. So his doctor is treating it by putting dog poo on it. The principle being that likes attract, so the dog poo is going to extract this infection from his eye. Someone who is a little bit more learned, maybe more willing to experiment, thinks this is not a good idea. But I like that that's all sort of background stuff to the main plot. It's that setting about the way that people were thinking in the times and behaving in the times that's really grounds the book to me in a lot of realism. But what I particularly like about this book, to me, it's an absolute masterful handling of different perspectives. There are 4 narrators in the book. They're all describing roughly the same events from their own point of view. At least two of the 4 are highly unreliable narrators. One is slightly unreliable and one is reliable. Sorry. And one is reliable, but it's up to you to find out who. Essentially, we have our 4 characters. There's a Venetian trader by the name of Marco de Cola. There's an Englishman by the name of Jack Prescott, whose goal in life is to prove that his father was not a traitor. There's a cryptographer by the name of John Wallace, and a young scholar by the name of Anthony Wood. The plot essentially is around a murder. So on the surface, it's a mystery that, as we all enjoy, but it does go a lot deeper, which I'll sort of talk about. So a man of some considerable influence is murdered. His young, impoverished maid by the name of Sarah Blundy is charged with the murder. She's charged, she's convicted, and she's executed. Now, this sounds like I'm giving you a spoiler, but the fact that those events happen is key to all that have subsequent events and sort of the plot of the book, because Sarah Blundy's story does not end there. But as I said, these 4 individual men all look upon these events and this woman in particular from their own point of view, from their own perspective, from their own prejudices, for sure. And they all are different. Question then, of course, is who's right? Is anybody right? Are they all right? Are they all wrong? So that everybody, of course, in any good mystery novel, everyone has their secrets. A couple of the narrators in particular have their secrets, which is why I said they're unreliable narrators. And generally all will be revealed at the end. You're not really left hanging too much. But far more is going on than first appears. What we have is a murder. We have witnesses to the murder. We have people telling, they have their own secrets to do with other things. And you have their own interpretation of whether this young woman is innocent or guilty. And does it matter to some of them? Does it matter? Hang her anyway, right? But far more is going on than first appears, because ultimately this book is dealing with nothing less than the meaning and the perception of the divine. Okay. So we have an enormous tapestry of conflicting ambitions, desperate secrets. Everybody's out to basically to save themselves in this extremely troubled times. This is one of the few books that I ever reread. I very rarely reread a book, even something I really enjoy, but this one I've read several times, because once you know the ultimate truth, you know what's has actually happened here, as interpreted by the author. Once you know what's actually happened, then reading the book again brings a whole lot of things into real clarity. You can see how these people's prejudices are affecting their interpretation of events so strongly that basically they're not seeing what's right in front of them. Okay. Now, one of the quibbles I might have with this book is that there are the 4 narrators who I named. Sarah Blundy never gives her point of view. She's probably the most important person in the book because she's the one that they're all talking about, but she never gives her point of view. I tend not to be a big fan of books that are all about, male angst, and where the woman is just kind of a side plot device, shall we say. But in this case, it works okay for me, because her essence is the core of the book. And yes, and certainly in 1665 or whatever, never mind our own times, that woman in her life, her entire life was dependent on what men thought of her. She had little agency, certainly particularly as a very poor woman. Her mother is dying. She's unable to get anybody to help, which is one of the sort of things that leads people to believe she might have murdered this man, because she's trying to get money to get medicine to save her mother, and she cannot. So she's interpreted through these men, and I think it works because it works for me anyway, because that is the way she would have gone through her life and the way that the world would have seen her. So that's pretty much for me. Another book I'm quickly going to mention, I'm not going to give any details, by Ian Pears, that is almost as good as the Dream of Scipio. Again, this one has 3 different historical time frames, 3 different narrators in each of the historical time frames, beautifully woven in together. He's written a couple of subsequent books that I've been exceptionally disappointed with. The last one, I think it was called Arcadia or something like that. I actually even wondered if someone else was writing it with him, because it was just not up to par. And I might be wrong, but I looked a couple of weeks ago to see if he had anything new coming out, and I don't see anything. But anyway, so An Instance of the Finger Post, I would highly recommend it to anybody. It's a big book. Did I show you here? It's quite a big book, but the detail is wonderful, and the actual question of what is happening here is wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Vicki. I also loved Instance of the Finger Post. I actually read it when it first came out and was absorbed in it. As you said, it's a very long book, 600 and some pages, and I got wrapped up into it. But then during the pandemic, St. Hilda's did a seminar about it and the Quincrux, which I hadn't read, which I can't remember the author's name, but they paired the 2 together. So I reread both of them, or I reread Instance and read Quincrux, and it was just equally as good. And like you said, once you know what's happening, it's a whole different read than it was the first time.
Sorry, Kristopher, what's the name of the second book that they mentioned?
Quincrux. It's Quincrux. It's Quincrux or something along those lines.
I'll have a look for it. Thank you very much. Thanks again for having me.
No problem. Thanks for being here. Our next guest is my friend Carol Goodman. Carol Goodman is the author of 25 novels, including The Lake of Dead Languages and The Seduction of Water, which won the 2003 Hammett Prize, The Widow's House, which won the 2018 Mary Higgins Clark Award, The Night Visitors, which won the 2020 Mary Higgins Clark Award. Her latest novel is The Bones of the Story. She lives in the Hudson Valley, and I'm just so glad you're here, Carol.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristopher, for having me. And thank you, Shawn. And to echo everyone's congratulations for the Amelia Award. It's wonderful for someone to receive an award, decide to use that opportunity to give back and promote books, but that's so you. So that makes sense. And thank you both for hosting this. I've just been so excited hearing about all these different books and, taking down my notes. This is so much fun. It's such a great idea. Well, I decided to do something a little different. I've been thinking about Christmas books, and to honor the season, and because this is what I've been thinking about them for various reasons. And one of my all-time favorite books is The Christmas Carol. That is not the book I'll be talking about, but I may refer to it. Instead, these are 2 Christmas books that I'm reading this season that just came out. Lisa Unger's Christmas Presents and The Christmas Guest by Peter Swanson. So I'm going to talk about each of these, and probably not in as much detail as everyone's gone into, since I'm going to be doing 2. What really started me off fascinated about Christmas books is the idea of a Christmas mystery, really, because we have a Christmas ghost story, I guess the 2 of those together, because a lot of the Christmas books you see tend to be kind of light, or we think of the Hallmark movie, and no dissing the Hallmark movie. We love those those Hallmark Christmas movies, and all the light traditions. And yet there's also a really dark tradition around Christmas stories. And that is what kind of fascinated me, starting with The Christmas Carol, which is, after all, a ghost story. And the whole tradition of ghost stories at Christmas, which, if you come from the UK, you probably grew up with A Ghost Story for Christmas, that series, and got to see all of those. We didn't get to see those here growing up, but now I've been watching them. Well, so to start out with my first choice, Lisa Unger's Christmas Presents. I've been a fan of Lisa Unger's books since, I think, her first book. And she's, a friend and a lovely person. So I was very excited to see what she would do with a Christmas book, because if you know Lisa's work, it's not going to be a Hallmark movie. That she has a great phrase that she uses when she talks about her writing process. she says she uses writing to metabolize the darkness inside her. And to me, that just perfectly gets at why we as crime and mystery writers, why we write about the dark things we write about, to metabolize that darkness. And so in her book, The Christmas Presents, we have a mystery plot. And as you know, she's a master at suspense. The book starts with a young woman who works she owns a bookshop in a small town in upstate New York. And we're introduced, her name's Madeline Martin. We're introduced to her. We very quickly realize that she doesn't like Christmas very much. It has really negative memories for her. And something happened to her on Christmas some years ago when she was a teenager. And we learn eventually that she had been assaulted, her best friend had been murdered, and murdered by, and I don't think this is spoiling this because it comes out pretty quickly, murdered by a young man that she had been interested in and involved with when she was a teenager. So that's a devastating thing that happens to her. And so her memories of Christmas are always intertwined with that. So we have Madeline's narrative, but then on the other point of view that we get is a young woman who's working at a strip club, and she loves Christmas, she says, and she's planning to go home to her family for Christmas. But we gather that there's somebody possibly stalking her, and in short, we find out that there's a serial killer on the loose, and we begin to suspect that this young woman might be a target of that serial killer. So we have this real contrast between, we have the sense of a past crime, and there's where I start. And Lisa uses each chapter, each part of the book is named after a part of A Christmas Carol. So we've got the sense of the ghosts from the past coming to visit, and that sense of, and that's such a great metaphor for this, for the novel of suspense where the past begins intruding on the present, which is a theme that I am always really fascinated with in suspense fiction. So I won't tell you, how that develops, but I do urge you to read it. What I really love is that even though this is a very dark book in many ways, it also has a lot of light in it, as I think a Christmas book has to. We have the bookshop. We have, what is better than a bookshop at Christmas time? So we get a little bit of sense of that coziness and the Christmas cheer, even though all these dark things are going on. And I won't spoil it by saying whether the light succeeds or the dark succeeds by the end of it. I started thinking of what category is this book that has this great bookshop, but also has these dark things happening? And I was thinking maybe cozy noir is what we could call a book like this. But I love it. And it's a chance, if you're the type of person who likes your Christmas entertainment a little bit on the dark side, if like me, your favorite Christmas movie is the 1974 slasher film Black Christmas, then this is the book for you. The second book, since now that I've gone on this mission to understand Christmas books, I read The Christmas Guest by Peter Swanson. And so I'm new to Peter Swanson. So I was new about a month ago to his work. I have quickly become a huge fan of his, starting with this book, which starts with, we're in New York City at Christmas time, and we have, again, a character who we have a sense something bad happened to in the past. We don't learn too much about her. And then she begins reading a diary that takes us back some 20 years ago to London. And it takes us to an art student, an American art student in London, who was invited to a country manor house over Christmas. So again, what could be more Christmassy? We get to go to this English village and, go to pubs and, see all the Christmas traditions. But as this American who is happily recounting this tells us there are also, dark secrets in this village. There was a murder recently. There's the possibility of, another serial killer on the loose. There is somebody lurking in the woods. And so there is a sense of menace. And as the diary continues, we get an increasing sense of menace. So again, we get this mixture of, and I read, he has a little afterward, Peter Swanson, where he talks about how he wanted to have all the trimmings in the book, as well as this suspenseful plot. He wanted to have a sense of us getting to enjoy all the Christmassiness. And the American girl keeps saying, oh, Christmas in an English country house, what could be better? So this, whereas I thought of Lisa's as cozy noir, I think of this as kind of a Miss Marple meets Gone Girl. Because the one of the things Peter Swanson does really well is the surprise twist. And I won't give it away, but the twist in this was so surprising to me. I was listening to it on my car on Audible, and when the twist came, I practically ran into something and gasped audibly. It's like, oh my God. So in this very, very slim book, it's you get a lot. So, and this launched me on reading. I think I'm on now my 5th Peter Swanson book since I finished this, because I'm like, because basically I'm looking at them going like, how does he do these twists? Because I would like to know how. So that's what. So again, if you're looking for something, if Christmas feels, if you've had too much fruitcake and things seem a little overly sweet, these are the Christmas books for you. And I also urge you to watch the A Ghost for Christmas and Black Christmas, and for everyone to have a Merry Christmas. So
That's so great. I cannot wait to dive into both of those now, because who doesn't love a good Christmas mystery, as we all know. As you were saying so eloquently, I worked retail at Christmas time, so I can understand murderous, thoughts for the holidays. I get it. And also if you don't like your family. But thank you so much for bringing those here to us. We really appreciate hearing about both of them. And I'm actually going to go out and I'd heard a lot about that Peter Swanson one, so I'm going to dive on that. I'm going to try not to drive my car though. I'll probably just sit in my house and listen or read. Our next guest is my friend, Kate B. Jackson, my friend. Kate is an author of mystery novels for grown-ups and mystery/adventure novels for kids. An alumnus of the University of Washington, go Huskies. She lives in the Pacific Northwest with her hilarious husband. I can attest to that. We had many a cocktail in San Diego. He is very funny. And usually at least one of her 4 mostly grown children. Part-time genetic genealogist. She loves to craft stories with elements of history and family dynamics. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Shawn, and thank you, Chris. I'm a little bit starstruck here. Some of these people that I've looked up to, and then of course you all are some of my favorite people. So I'm really honored to be included in this. It's surprising how difficult it is to choose one book when somebody says choose one book that you want to present to the world to talk about, because as a lover of fiction, it's not easy. And because I have one foot in the kidlit world and one foot in the mystery world, I was kind of battling, but I ended up I ended up choosing Snow Falling on Cedars, which is an old book. It was released in 1994, so just around the time that my oldest child was born nearly 30 years ago. And I wasn't sure if it had too much exposure, but the reason why it had come up for me recently is that I'm involved in the planning of Left Coast Crime 2024 here in the Seattle area, Seattle Shakedown. And we are going to be honoring John Okada, who was a Japanese-American writer who talked about the experiences of Japanese Americans after World War II in his book, No Boy, which we are going to be honoring him. We've got Frank Abe coming to talk about No Boy and John Okada, and I believe Shawn Wong, and they're going to be having a conversation with Naomi Hirahara. So because I've been thinking a lot about Seattle fiction and specifically the impact of World War II on the Japanese American community in my region of the Pacific Northwest Seattle area, Snow Falling on Cedars was a really impactful book for me to read because I grew up in this area and knew nothing about this, did not learn about it in schools. And it wasn't until I was a new mom and one of my preschool mom friends decided to start a book club, and her husband's Japanese American and his family had been impacted by the internments and the anti-Japanese rhetoric that was happening in our region after World War II. And so she wanted this to be the book. And so this was my first book club book as a grown-up ever. And it has stuck with me. It's very Pacific Northwest. It's very moody. It's supposed to be set around the same time as when John Okada's book was written. So about 10 years after World War II. It's set in an area in the San Juan Islands, which is north of me, but it's a fictional island. So he was able to craft a community and really tell the story about how a community could be so interwoven and also still other people within that community. So the gist of the book, for those of you who haven't seen the Ethan Hawke movie that came out in 1999 or didn't read the book back when it came out in 1994, it's told from this perspective of the only journalist in town he runs the paper, and it's a one-man show. His name is Ishmael Chambers, and he is covering the trial of a man named Kabuo Miramoto. And he is on trial for the murder of a local fisherman. And this trial is taking place in the midst of a snowstorm. And for those of you who don't know about the San Juan Islands, they're kind of isolated. They're not easy to get to. And if a storm hits, you're pretty much there. The Strait of Juan de Fuca is not really someplace you want to be traveling by boat if there's a storm happening, because it can get pretty rough out there. So this trial is taking place in kind of this closed courtroom setting. And so a lot of the story is told through flashbacks. What we begin to learn is that the Miyamoto family had been living on a farm, working on a farm, and paying like incrementally toward acquiring the farm when they were taken away to an internment camp. And when they returned, the farm had been sold to, I believe it's Heine. I don't love saying the word Heine, but I think that that's how you pronounce the name. It's either Hein or Heine, to that family. And the man that he's accused of murdering is one of the people that now own this farm. And so it comes out as he's covering the trial that he had been in a relationship with Kabuo, with his wife when they were younger. So the reporter had gotten his heart broken by the man that's on trial. And so throughout this book, he's trying to examine how much of his feelings about this man and what he believes he did against this other man on the island. He's realizing how much of his anti-Japanese bias is coming to the forefront because he had lost his arm in World War II while fighting against the Japanese. Meanwhile, Kabuo is a decorated veteran of the war, fighting on behalf of America, and had come home to find that everything had been taken away from them, and he's still being treated really poorly. And now he's on trial for murdering somebody. So there's a lot of different components to this story. It really examines the racial components of and ethnic components of what happens when there's a war. I think it's really timely right now because there's conflicts that are happening right now, and you see that those topics just keep coming up over and over again. And so I just really love the fact that this story stands the test of time. It was written by David Guterson, who was a teacher, and he would write this in the morning before school, and created this amazing book that really, I think for all of us, what we want to do is we want a book to help us to examine our stuff, right? We want it to kind of make us go, ooh, what do I feel about? Why do I feel this way? What is this bringing out in me? And so I just feel like this book was a really great example of what a book can do. And it really connected me to the history of my region. And so I highly recommend it if you've never read it, or if you want to revisit it. It's a great book.
Thanks so much, Kate. I was so glad when you said that you were going to pick this book, and we had this brief discussion about, was it mystery enough? And I think it's interesting that sometimes we forget that literary works can also be mysteries. And some people try to distance themselves from that, but I don't think David Guterson was ever one of those people. I mean, I think he firmly believed it was a mystery. So I'm glad you brought it. I mean, it definitely has a mystery in it. It has so much more history and everything in it too, but it's a perfect choice. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
And our final guest for this evening is Gigi Pandian. Gigi is a USA Today best-selling author and locked room mystery enthusiast who's been awarded the Agatha, Anthony, Lefty, and Derringer Awards. She writes the Accidental Alchemist mysteries, the Jaya Jones Treasure Hunt mysteries, and most recently, the Secret Staircase mysteries, which the New York Times Book Review called wildly entertaining. She lives in Northern California with her husband and a gargoyle who watches over the backyard vegetable garden. So happy to have you, Gigi.
Thank you so much, Kristopher. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight. Thank you to you and Shawn for inviting me today. And so I thought that I would talk about a book that is actually related, Kristopher, to you and the Amelia Award and the Malice Domestic community, which is, you know, in a way how we're all here right now, and which also happens to be my favorite novel. Which I think is an underrated book. And the book is Borrower of the Night by Elizabeth Peters. And I think for folks who are watching this right now, you are most likely aware of who Elizabeth Peters is. She is a very well-known and well-loved author in the traditional mystery community. And she was one of the founders of Malice Domestic, and a big proponent of traditional mysteries. And her most successful series that is a favorite of so many people are the Amelia Peabody mysteries, which are wonderful mysteries about an intrepid Egyptologist. They're historical mysteries, and they are absolutely wonderful. But it was not Amelia that captured my heart when I first started reading mystery novels. It was Vicki Bliss in this novel, and this beaten up old paperback is my original copy of the book that I have carried with me for decades, wherever I have lived. And this is the book that I brought with me to Malice Domestic when I was honored to meet Elizabeth Peters once and have her sign this book. So this yellowed copy, I have many copies of this book because it's also a book I gift people a lot. But this beaten up old paperback from the 1980s is my beloved copy. So let me tell you all a little bit about why Vicki is such a special character and why Borrower of the Night, I think, is an underrated book that you should give a chance to. So Vicki Bliss is an art historian who is a fierce feminist, and she solves mysteries all over the world. So she globetrots all around the world, going on adventures that ruined castles and being helped or hindered by a charming art thief. And so the books are a combination mashup of mystery, history, humor, travel, and romance. And I strongly feel that Elizabeth Peters invented a genre onto herself. She gets away with mashing up all of these different genres because she brings a combination of intelligence and lighthearted fun to the page. If you pick up a Vicki Bliss novel, you know you are going to get a ridiculously silly and fun romp that is also incredibly smart and where you're also learning a lot at the same time. So in this first Vicki Bliss mystery, you're introduced to her when she is a professor at a small, unnamed Midwestern college, and she discovers a secret in a boring old academic book. And it sets her off on this adventure to this treasure hunting at a castle in Germany. And there are other people who've tagged along, even though she was the one who made the discovery. And I should tell you, I wasn't going to go into my own history of why I love this, but after hearing Kate talk, I thought I would actually say this. So I was actually on the academic path myself originally, and I had started a PhD in Seattle at the University of Washington. But after having discovered Vicki and this whole genre of mystery several years before that, when I was actually ensconced in academia myself, I realized that the fictional adventures of academics were much more fun than being one myself. And I should have known this all along. So it wasn't just Vicki who's the reason why I left academia, but I did know that I always wanted to do something more creative. And I would not be a writer today if not for the Vicki Bliss novels. And the reason that these books are something that I mentioned that I gift them to so many people, it's because they are perfect escapist books, but for people who want something deeper in their books as well. And I had read all of the books already by the time I was in my 30s, but I hadn't reread them all until I was going through a year of cancer treatments that I needed like comfort food reading. And I reread all of these books and realized how comforting they were, not just because I had discovered them at a certain point in my life, although I'm sure that helped, but really because of that intersection of everything, how they can be so smart and feminist, and you learn so much about things, but also by being just really fun, silly books. And so what I've ended up doing is I've given this book to so many people I know when they're going through a tough time. And I have heard that they have been a hit. So I recommend them as comfort food reading. If you need something either for yourself or someone who likes this type of book, but who's maybe going through a tough time, but who wants popcorn, but not exactly popcorn. So they hit the spot like that. And Elizabeth Peters also was just such a wonderful human being in how she was involved in the mystery community. So that gives the books extra meaning to me, but they're just wonderful books and full circle for me as a writer and to the Malice domestic community. So that's why I wanted to have Borrow Over the Night, the first Vicki Bliss novel by Elizabeth Peters, for this series here tonight.
Thanks so much, Gigi. That's perfect. It brings us right back to the circle. I'm very honored to be receiving the Amelia Award next year. I'm very excited. For those that don't know, by the time you're watching this video, registration for Malice will be open. So please join us next year and come celebrate with us. And I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Shawn for being my co-host. And I want to say have a great holiday season. And until next time, read often and read widely. See you guys.
We forgot to do our recommendations.
Oh,
Happy
you're
holiday.
right. That's fine. We'll let him cut there and we'll do that. And okay, here we go. You are right. All right. Time for Shawn and I to give our recommendations of new releases coming up in the future that we think are really great and you should be looking forward to. So my choice this time is The Weekend Retreat by Tara Zgorski. The Weekend Retreat is a story about a family of that owns a winery, and the matriarch has passed away, and there's a tradition in the family of the two twins. Whenever they have their birthday, all the family come and bring all of their significant others. So it's a weekend. They're all going to be there, 6 people, 3 couples. And then, of course, at the very beginning of the novel, we find out that there was a horrible storm that rolled through the area, and there was 2 dead bodies found. You don't know who the bodies are, but then you're whisked back to the beginning of the weekend, and you're just waiting to see who is dead by the end of this book. I'm only halfway through it, so I don't even know who died yet, but I have to tell you, I'm loving it. So I just wanted to bring it to you guys today. Tara Zgorski is really, really good at doing interpersonal relationships and especially small groups of people together. So I think she does it again here. So please check that one out.
Yep, and she's also a lot of fun. My recommendation this month is City of Betrayal by Victoria Thompson. And this is the 7th book in the series. It's the Elizabeth Bates. She's a grifter, which is always so cool, like a con lady. So the tagline is Elizabeth Bates' latest con just might change the course of history in an all new counterfeit lady novel. So basically she's been taking a break from con work for like a year, and then gets involved with the 19th Amendment, like ratifying the women's right to vote. So I think that I just can't wait. I can't wait to read this. It's gonna be so fun. But she kind of uses her con artist skills to get men to understand that women should be voting. So I think that's all. Yeah, there's always a theme. I'm always like with women's rights kind of stuff in all my picks. But I do love I love Victoria's books. I think she's an amazing writer. She writes multiple other series. She's also a really wonderful person. So I can't wait to read her book.
Excellent. Thanks, Shawn. We'll have Michael do his little magic editing there, and that will all look perfect when it airs. Thanks so much.